Woman delivers an army of tiny aliens instead of babies. How will this story escalate? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. Emily Carter never imagined her pregnancy would make headlines, let alone redefine humanity's understanding of the universe. At 32, she'd spent the last 5 years meticulously planning for this chapter of her life. She'd read every parenting book, followed the latest blogs, and even joined an online support group for expectant mothers. But all the preparation in the world couldn't have prepared her for what was about to happen. The pregnancy started like any other. Emily and her husband Jack had been over the moon when the test turned positive. Their excitement grew with every milestone: the first ultrasound, the sound of the baby's heartbeat, the flutter of movement in Emily's belly. Everything seemed perfect. Until it wasn't. By her third trimester, Emily began experiencing symptoms that no one, not even her doctor, could explain. Her appetite changed drastically. She craved things she'd never liked before, like raw mushrooms and, chalk. Her skin started to glow, not metaphorically, but literally. At night, Jack would joke that he didn't need a bedside lamp anymore because Emily was radiating like a light bulb. But it wasn't just the cravings or the glowing skin. Emily began having vivid dreams of distant galaxies, swirling stars, and strange, unearthly beings who spoke to her in a language she didn't understand but somehow felt in her bones. "Maybe it's just the hormones," Jack said one morning as Emily recounted another bizarre dream. "Pregnancy does weird things to people." Emily nodded, but deep down, she felt something was off. Still, she brushed it aside, focusing on preparing for the baby's arrival. The day Emily went into labor started like any other. She woke up to a crisp autumn morning, the sunlight streaming through the windows of their cozy suburban home. She'd planned to spend the day organizing the nursery, but by mid-morning, the contractions began. Jack was a bundle of nerves, fumbling with the car keys as he helped Emily into the passenger seat. "Breathe, Emily, breathe," he said, as if he were the one in labor. "I'm breathing, Jack." Emily snapped, gripping the door handle as another contraction hit. "Just drive." By the time they reached the hospital, Emily was in full labor. Nurses whisked her into a delivery room, where her doctor, Dr. Patel, met her with a reassuring smile. "Everything's going to be fine, Emily," Dr. Patel said as she prepared for the delivery. "Just focus on pushing when I tell you to." Emily nodded, sweat beading on her forehead. She tried to focus, but the pain was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. It wasn't just physical, it felt like her entire body was being rewritten, as if something otherworldly was happening beneath her skin. And then it happened. The room fell silent as the first baby emerged. Dr. Patel froze, her face a mixture of shock and disbelief. The nurse standing beside her let out a small gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. What is it?" Emily panted, her voice trembling with exhaustion and fear. "Is the baby okay?" Dr. Patel didn't answer immediately. She was too busy staring at the tiny, wriggling creature in her hands. It wasn't a baby, not a human one at least. It was small, no larger than a kitten, with large, almond-shaped eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the sterile hospital light. Its skin was smooth and slightly translucent, and it had delicate antennae sprouting from its head. Emily's heart raced as she tried to sit up, straining to see what was happening. "What's wrong? What's going on?" Jack, who had been standing by her side, took a step back, his face pale. "Emily, I think you need to see this." Another contraction hit, and before Emily could process what Jack meant, she delivered another and another. Within minutes, a dozen tiny creatures had been born, each one as peculiar and mesmerizing as the first. The room erupted into chaos. Nurses whispered frantically to one another, and Dr. Patel looked like she might faint. Jack stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Emily, however, felt an unexpected wave of calm wash over her. She looked down at the creatures now squirming in a shallow tray the nurses had hastily placed on a nearby table. Despite their alien appearance, there was something oddly familiar about them. She couldn't explain it, but she felt an instant connection, a maternal instinct that overpowered her fear. "They're mine," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I don't know how, but they're mine. The hospital staff quickly locked down the delivery room, barring anyone from entering or leaving. Within hours, the news had reached hospital administration, and they, in turn, contacted local authorities. By evening, representatives from the federal government arrived, their suits crisp and their expressions unreadable. One of them, a tall woman with piercing blue eyes who introduced herself as Agent Reynolds, addressed Emily and Jack in a low, measured tone. We understand this is a unique situation, she said, her gaze flickering to the tray of alien creatures. But for the safety of everyone involved, we need to take custody of these beings. No, Emily said firmly, surprising even herself. She was still weak from labor, but her voice was steady. They're my children. I won't let you take them. Agent Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Mrs. Carter, with all due respect, these aren't children. They're something else. We need to study them, understand what they are and where they came from. They came from me, Emily shot back, her voice rising. I don't care what they look like, they're mine. And I'm not handing them over to anyone. Jack, who had been silent until now, placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. She's right, he said, his voice trembling but resolute. Whatever they are, they're part of our family. We'll cooperate, but we're not giving them up. Agent Reynolds studied them for a long moment before sighing. She said, but we'll be monitoring this situation very closely. And if there's any sign of danger, we'll have to intervene. With that, she and her team left, leaving Emily and Jack alone with their dozen alien babies. The room was quiet except for the soft, melodic chirping sounds the creatures made as they nestled together. Emily reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and touched one of the tiny beings. Its skin was cool and smooth, and it leaned into her touch, its glowing eyes locking onto hers. What are we going to do, Jack? She whispered. Jack sat down beside her, his face a mixture of fear and wonder. I don't know, he admitted. But whatever happens, we'll figure it out. Together. That night, as Emily lay in her hospital bed, the tiny aliens nestled in a specially prepared incubator beside her, she had another vivid dream. This time, the swirling stars and celestial beings weren't distant. They were right in front of her, their voices clear. They are a gift, the beings said, their voices harmonizing like a song. They are part of you and part of us. Protect them, nurture them, and they will change the world. When Emily woke, the words lingered in her mind, filling her with a strange sense of purpose. She looked over at the incubator, where the creatures were huddled together, their antennae twitching gently. Whatever they were, wherever they had come from, she knew one thing for certain. They were hers, and she would do whatever it took to keep them safe. The morning after the delivery, the hospital room buzzed with an uneasy tension. Nurses tiptoed in and out, their eyes darting nervously toward the incubator that housed Emily's alien babies. Doctors whispered in corners, casting furtive glances at the creatures as if afraid to get too close. Emily ignored them. She had spent the night watching over her tiny brood, her protective instincts growing stronger with each passing hour. The creatures were fascinating to observe. They communicated with soft, melodic chirps, their large eyes blinking in unison as if sharing some unspoken understanding. When Emily reached into the incubator, they flocked to her hand, their small, delicate limbs clinging to her fingers. Jack, on the other hand, was still struggling to process the situation. He paced the room, running his hands through his hair. Emily, I don't know what to do, he said, his voice a mixture of fear and frustration. This isn't normal. This isn't human. Emily looked up at him, her gaze steady. I know it's not normal, Jack, but they're here and they're ours. We can't just turn our backs on them. Jack sighed, sinking into a chair. I'm not saying we should. What happens next? What if they're dangerous? What if the government comes back and tries to take them? They're not dangerous, Emily said firmly. Look at them. They're harmless. As if to prove her point, one of the creatures crawled toward her, its antennae twitching. It chirped softly, and Emily smiled, reaching out to stroke its smooth head. The creature leaned into her touch, emitting a low, soothing hum. Jack watched the interaction, his expression softening. Okay, he said finally. We'll figure this out. But we need a plan. By midday, word of Emily's extraordinary delivery had leaked beyond the hospital. Reporters gathered outside, their cameras trained on the entrance as they shouted questions at anyone who walked by. News headlines blared phrases like "Woman gives birth to alien creatures" and "The most bizarre birth in history." Social media was ablaze with speculation, theories ranging from government experiments to extraterrestrial intervention. Inside the hospital, Emily and Jack were visited once again by Agent Reynolds. This time, she was accompanied by two men in lab coats who introduced themselves as Drive West and Dr. Huang, researchers from a top-secret government agency. "Mrs. Carter," Drive West began, his tone measured, "we're here to observe the entities you've delivered. We need to conduct some tests to understand what they are and where they came from." Emily crossed her arms, her protective instincts flaring. "And what happens after you understand them? Are you going to take them away?" Dr. Huang stepped forward, her expression gentler. "We're not here to take them from you. We simply want to ensure they pose no threat to you or to others. Their biology could be completely alien, which means they might carry unknown risks." Jack placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. "Maybe we should let them run a few tests," he said carefully. "It could help us understand what we're dealing with." Emily hesitated, her gaze shifting to the incubator where the creatures chirped softly. Finally, she nodded. "Fine. But I want to be there. And if they hurt them, it stops." "Agreed. Agreed," Drive West said, though his expression suggested he wasn't used to being given conditions. The tests were conducted in a specially sterilized lab within the hospital, with Emily watching closely. The creatures were cooperative, chirping curiously as the scientists drew tiny samples of their blood and examined their anatomy using non-invasive scans. To everyone's surprise, their biology was a fascinating mix of familiar and alien. Their cells contained elements found in human DNA, but they also had structures that defied known science. "These creatures aren't entirely extraterrestrial," Dr. Huang said, examining the results. "There's a clear connection to human biology. It's as if they're hybrids." "Hybrids?" Emily repeated, her heart racing. "What does that mean?" Drive West shrugged, his brow furrowed. "It's too soon to say, but it suggests that whatever these beings are, they didn't just come from outer space. There's a link to you, Mrs. Carter." Emily stared at the creatures, a strange mixture of awe and confusion washing over her. "So, they're part of me?" "In a way, yes," Dr. Huang said. "But we need more data to understand how that's possible." As the days turned into weeks, Emily and Jack took the creatures home, much to the dismay of Agent Reynolds, who insisted on installing surveillance cameras throughout their house. "For everyone's safety," she said, though Emily suspected it was more about keeping tabs on the aliens than protecting her family. Life with the creatures was unlike anything Emily had ever imagined. They were incredibly intelligent, learning quickly and adapting to their surroundings. They communicated with chirps and hums that Emily began to recognize as distinct sounds with specific meanings. They even seemed to understand her words, responding to commands like, "Come here" and "Stay." But it wasn't all smooth sailing. The creatures had a mischievous streak, often getting into things they shouldn't. One evening, Emily walked into the kitchen to find them climbing onto the counters, their antennae twitching as they explored the cabinets. "Hey, get down from there," she scolded, though she couldn't help but laugh as they chirped apologetically and scampered back to their designated play area. Jack, still adjusting to their presence, found himself reluctantly charmed by their antics. "They're like toddlers," he said one night as he watched them chase each other around the living room. "Weird, alien toddlers." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with affection. "There are toddlers," she said, "and I wouldn't trade them for anything." As the creatures grew, they began to exhibit abilities that defied explanation. Their glowing eyes allowed them to see in complete darkness, and their antennae could detect emotions, vibrating softly when someone in the room was upset. But the most astonishing ability emerged one afternoon when Emily accidentally cut her hand while preparing lunch. She winced, holding her bleeding hand under the faucet, when one of the creatures approached her. It chirped urgently, its antennae vibrating. Before Emily could react, it placed its tiny hand on her wound. A warm, tingling sensation spread through her palm, and within seconds, the cut was completely healed. "Jack," Emily called, her voice filled with both shock and excitement. "You need to see this." Jack rushed into the kitchen, his eyes widening as Emily showed him her uninjured hand. Did it heal you?" "Yes," Emily said, her voice trembling. "I think they can heal." Jack stared at the creature, his expression a mix of wonder and disbelief. "Emily, do you realize what this means? They're not just unique, they're miraculous." News of the creature's abilities quickly spread, drawing even more attention to the Carter family. Scientists, journalists, and even religious leaders weighed in, offering theories and opinions. Some saw the creatures as a gift, a sign of hope and progress. Others feared them, warning that their existence could disrupt the natural order. Through it all, Emily remained steadfast in her role as their mother. She shielded them from the growing public scrutiny, refusing to let anyone exploit them. "They're not experiments," she told a reporter who showed up at their doorstep. "They're my children." But as tensions rose, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the creatures were more than just her children. They were part of something much bigger. And as she looked into their glowing eyes, she couldn't help but wonder, why were they here? Weeks turned into months, and the creatures, Emily's alien children, continued to grow and evolve. Though they remained small in stature, they began to develop personalities and quirks that endeared them even more to Emily and, slowly but surely, to Jack. One of the creatures, whom Emily had nicknamed Luma, was particularly curious, often climbing onto her lap to watch her as she read or cooked. Another, whom Jack reluctantly named Bolt after its boundless energy, seemed to have an insatiable need to explore every corner of the house. "They're like a little army of chaos," Jack joked one evening as he tried to untangle a string of Christmas lights that the creatures had somehow managed to knot together. Emily chuckled, setting down a bowl of popcorn. "They're curious. It's how they learn." But their curiosity wasn't always harmless. One afternoon, Emily found two of them fiddling with the thermostat. Another time, Bolt managed to short-circuit the microwave after mimicking Jack's attempt to heat up leftovers. Still, Emily's love for them only grew. She began to see each challenge as part of her role as their mother, and she embraced it wholeheartedly. Jack, too, found himself drawn to the creatures, despite his initial reservations. Late at night, Emily often caught him sitting on the floor with them, building elaborate towers out of blocks that the creatures would gleefully knock over. But outside their cozy home, the world was becoming increasingly unsettled. News of the creatures' healing abilities had sparked global interest, and Emily's quiet suburban life was quickly turning into a media circus. Protesters and supporters alike gathered outside their house, holding signs that ranged from "Aliens Go Home" to "Save the Miracles." Drones hovered above their backyard, capturing footage for tabloid websites, and Emily had to install heavy curtains to shield the creatures from prying eyes. Agent Reynolds returned with an even larger team, insisting on heightened security measures. "This is for your protection," she told Emily, though her tone suggested she was just as interested in controlling the situation as she was in keeping Emily and the creatures safe. "I don't want them treated like prisoners," Emily said firmly. "They deserve a life, just like any other children." Reynolds hesitated, her expression softening. "I understand how you feel, Mrs. Carter, but you have to realize, they're not just your children anymore. They're a global phenomenon." Emily bristled at the words. "They're my family," she said, "and I won't let anyone take that away." Reynolds sighed but didn't argue. Still, the increased presence of government agents made life even more challenging. Emily couldn't take the creatures outside without being followed by a small entourage, and she worried about how this environment would affect them. Meanwhile, the creatures continued to reveal more of their unique abilities. Their healing powers, which Emily had initially believed to be limited to minor injuries, turned out to be far more potent. One evening, Jack accidentally twisted his ankle while carrying groceries up the front steps. Before Emily could even get an ice pack, three of the creatures had rushed to Jack's side, their antennae glowing faintly as they surrounded his injured foot. Within seconds, the swelling disappeared, and Jack stood up, his ankle completely healed. "This is incredible," Jack said, testing his weight on the previously injured foot. "Emily, do you realize what this could mean? They could change medicine change the world. Emily nodded, though her expression was cautious. Or it could make them targets, she said. Jack, if people find out what they can really do. I don't even want to think about what could happen. Her fears weren't unfounded. News outlets and social media were already speculating wildly about the creatures' abilities. Some hailed them as miraculous beings sent to heal humanity, while others painted them as a potential threat. Conspiracy theories ran rampant, with some claiming the creatures were the result of a secret government experiment gone wrong, while others insisted they were scouts for an impending alien invasion. Emily did her best to shield the creatures from the growing hysteria, but it wasn't always possible. One day, while playing a game of hide-and-seek with the creatures, she noticed Luma staring out the window, its antennae twitching as it watched the crowd of protesters outside. Emily knelt beside it, gently pulling the curtain closed. "It's okay, sweetie," she said softly. "You don't need to worry about them. You're safe here." Luma chirped in response, nuzzling against her hand. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the creatures understood more than they let on. As tensions outside their home reached a boiling point, Emily received an unexpected visit from Dr. Huang. The scientist had remained in contact with Emily, occasionally checking in to share findings from her research on the creatures. But this visit was different. Dr. Huang's expression was grave as she sat down at the kitchen table, a thick folder in her hands. "I need to show you something," Dr. Huang said, opening the folder to reveal a series of scans and charts. "We've been studying their biology extensively, and we've discovered something remarkable." Emily leaned forward, her heart pounding. "What is it?" Dr. Huang pointed to one of the charts. "Their DNA isn't just a mix of human and alien elements. It's adaptive. It's constantly evolving based on its environment. And we've detected a kind of resonance in their cellular structure, almost like a frequency." "Resonance?" Jack repeated, sitting beside Emily. "What does that mean?" "It means they're not just living organisms, they're connected to something much bigger. We don't know what, but it's as if they're part of a larger system, like a network." Emily frowned, her protective instincts flaring. "Are you saying there's some kind of tools? That they're here for a purpose?" Dr. Huang hesitated. "I don't know, but I think they're here for a reason. And whatever that reason is, it's not random." The weight of Dr. Huang's words settled over the room like a heavy fog. Emily looked at the creatures, who were gathered in a corner, chirping softly to one another. They seemed so innocent, so childlike. But if Dr. Huang was right, they might be far more than that. That night, Emily had another dream. The celestial beings from her previous visions returned, their voices clearer than ever. "The time is coming," they said. "They are the bridge. Protect them and they will protect you." When Emily woke, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. She looked at the creatures, who were curled up together in their makeshift bed, their antennae glowing faintly in the dark. Whatever their purpose was, she knew one thing for certain: she would do everything in her power to keep them safe. The next morning, Emily's fears were realized when the crowd outside her house turned violent. Protesters clashed with supporters, and someone threw a rock through one of the windows. Jack rushed to board it up, while Emily called Agent Reynolds. "We need help," Emily said, her voice shaking. "The situation is out of control." Within minutes, government agents arrived to disperse the crowd, but the damage was done. Emily knew they couldn't stay there much longer. The creatures needed a safe place, away from the chaos. "Jack," she said that evening as they sat in the living room, "we need to leave. For their sake." Jack nodded, his jaw set. "But where would we go? We're being watched constantly." Emily thought for a moment, then said, "We'll figure it out. But we can't stay here. They deserve better." As she spoke, Luma crawled onto her lap, chirping softly. Emily stroked its head, her resolve hardening. No matter what it took, she would protect them. They were her family, and family meant everything. Emily spent the night planning their escape. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary was now a cage surrounded by chaos. Protesters and supporters camped outside in growing numbers, their chants and shouts echoing through the neighborhood. The broken window was a stark reminder that it was no longer safe for her family or the creatures she had come to love so deeply. Jack sat at the kitchen table, a laptop open in front of him as he researched potential locations. "We can't just pack up and leave," he said, his voice low. "Agent Reynolds and her team will notice the moment we try. We need a distraction." Emily glanced over at the creatures, who were huddled together in the corner, their antennae twitching as if sensing her anxiety. "I don't want them to feel like they're running for their lives," she said softly. "They're just children." "They're more than that," Jack said, his tone cautious but firm. "Emily, we need to face the fact that they're not just ours anymore. The whole world is watching. If we run, it'll only make things worse." Emily's hands clenched into fists. "So what do you suggest? We just sit here and let the world rip them apart piece by piece?" "I won't let that happen," Jack sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "No, I'm not saying that. But we need help. Someone we can trust." The next day, Emily called Dr. Huang. Of all the people involved in the situation, she was the only one Emily felt she could rely on. When Dr. Huang arrived, she listened intently as Emily explained her plan to leave. "It's risky," Dr. Huang said, her brow furrowed. "Agent Reynolds won't let you disappear without a fight. But I think I might know someone who can help." Dr. Huang pulled out her phone and made a call. Within an hour, a man in his late 50s arrived at the house. He introduced himself as Dr. Malcolm Green, a retired astrophysicist who had spent decades studying extraterrestrial phenomena. "I've heard about your situation," Dr. Green said, his voice calm and measured. "And I believe I can help. There's a facility, off the grid, secure. It's designed for studying anomalies like this, but more importantly, it's a safe place." Emily looked at him skeptically. "And why should I trust you? For all I know, you're just another scientist who wants to poke and prod them." Dr. Green smiled faintly. "I don't want to study them. I want to protect them. And if you let me, I'll do everything in my power to make sure they stay safe." Emily exchanged a glance with Jack, who gave a hesitant nod. She said, "What's the plan?" The plan was set in motion that evening. Dr. Green arranged for a decoy vehicle to leave the house, drawing the attention of the protesters and the agents stationed nearby. Meanwhile, Emily, Jack, and the creatures would be smuggled out in an unmarked van driven by Dr. Huang. The creatures seemed to sense the urgency of the situation. As Emily packed a few essentials, Luma climbed onto her shoulder, chirping softly. "It's going to be okay," Emily whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring the creature or herself. When the time came, Emily and Jack bundled the creatures into small, insulated carriers designed to keep them safe and warm. The van was parked in the alley behind the house, hidden from view. Dr. Huang opened the back doors, motioning for them to hurry. "Let's go," she said. "We don't have much time." Emily climbed into the van first, her heart pounding as Jack handed her the carriers one by one. The creatures chirped quietly, their glowing eyes darting around as if trying to understand what was happening. As the van pulled away, Emily looked out the tinted windows, her chest tightening at the sight of the crowd gathered outside the front of their house. It was a sea of signs, cameras, and shouting voices. She turned away, focusing instead on the creatures nestled beside her. The drive to the facility was tense but uneventful. Dr. Huang navigated the back roads carefully, avoiding main highways to reduce the risk of being spotted. Emily and Jack sat in the back, holding onto the carriers tightly. The creatures seemed unusually calm, as if they understood that this journey was necessary. After several hours, they arrived at a secluded property surrounded by dense forest. The facility was a modest building, more like a large cabin than a high-tech lab. Dr. Green was waiting for them at the entrance, his expression one of quiet relief. "Welcome," he said, opening the doors to let them inside. "You're safe here." The interior of the facility was simple but comfortable. There were several rooms for sleeping, a kitchen, and a large open area filled with cushions, toys, and climbing structures for the creatures. Emily felt a wave of gratitude as she looked around. It wasn't home, but it was better than she had expected. "Their safety is my top priority," Dr. Green said as he showed them around. "This place is off the radar. No internet, no outside communication. It's secure." Emily nodded, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know how to repay you for this." "You don't need to," Dr. Green said simply. "Just focus on taking care of them." Over the next few weeks, life at the facility settled into a strange but peaceful routine. The creatures thrived in their new environment, exploring their surroundings with boundless curiosity. Emily and Jack worked closely with Dr. Green and Dr. Huang to ensure their needs were met, from food and shelter to emotional stimulation. But the calm was short-lived. One evening, as Emily was putting the creatures to bed, Luma began chirping urgently. Its antennae vibrated, and its glowing eyes darted toward the window. Emily frowned, walking over to see what had caught its attention. In the distance, through the trees, she saw faint lights, moving lights. Her heart sank. Someone had found them. "Jack," she called, her voice shaking. "We have a problem." Jack and Dr. Green rushed to her side, their expressions grim as they spotted the lights. "It's a search team," Dr. Green said. "They must have tracked us somehow." "What do we do?" Emily asked, panic creeping into her voice. "We have a contingency plan," Dr. Green said. "There's a hidden underground bunker nearby. It's small, but it's secure. We can move the creatures there." Emily nodded, her resolve hardening. "Let's do it." The next hour was a blur of activity. Emily and Jack quickly gathered the creatures, placing them back into their carriers. Dr. Huang led the way through a hidden door at the back of the facility, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into the earth. The bunker was dimly lit but spacious enough to accommodate the creatures and the family. As they settled in, Emily could hear the faint hum of engines above ground, followed by muffled voices. She held her breath, praying that whoever was searching wouldn't find them. The creatures huddled close to her, their antennae glowing faintly as they emitted soft, harmonious hums. Emily stroked Luma's head, whispering soothing words even as her own fear threatened to overwhelm her. After what felt like an eternity, the voices above grew quieter, then disappeared entirely. Dr. Green, who had been monitoring a small surveillance screen, turned to them with a relieved expression. "They're gone. For now." Emily exhaled, her shoulders slumping with exhaustion. But she knew this wasn't over. The world wasn't going to stop looking for them, and the creatures' safety would always be at risk. "They're not going to stop," she said quietly. "Not until they get what they want." Dr. Green nodded solemnly. "Then we'll just have to stay one step ahead." The quiet of the underground bunker was a stark contrast to the chaos they had just fled. Emily sat on the floor, Luma nestled in her lap while the other creatures huddled together, their soft chirps filling the silence. Jack paced the small space, his jaw tight with worry. "How long can we stay down here?" he asked, his voice low. "We can't keep running forever." Dr. Green leaned against the wall, his expression thoughtful. "The search team may come back, but they won't stay indefinitely. They'll assume we've moved on if they don't find any trace of us." Emily looked at the creatures, her heart aching. "But what kind of life is this for them? Hiding, running, always looking over our shoulders. They deserve better." Dr. Huang stepped forward, her gaze steady. "They do. But until we understand why they're here and what they're connected to, we have to keep them safe. Whatever brought them here, it's not random." Emily sighed, running her fingers through Luma's soft, smooth skin. "I just want them to be happy, to have a chance to grow, to live without fear." "They will," Dr. Green said firmly. "But first, we need answers." The following day, Dr. Huang set up a small lab in the bunker to continue her research. With the creature's consent, something Emily insisted on, she collected more samples and conducted non-invasive scans. What she discovered only deepened the mystery. "Their cells are emitting a low-frequency signal," Dr. Huang explained, showing Emily and Jack a series of charts on her tablet. "It's like a beacon, constantly transmitting into space. I believe it's how they're connected to whatever sent them here." "A beacon?" Emily repeated, her brow furrowing. "You mean they're trying to communicate with something? Or someone?" Dr. Huang nodded. "It's possible. But the signal is faint, almost as if it's incomplete. It's like they're waiting for something to activate it fully." Emily glanced at the creatures, who were gathered in a corner, playing with a set of colored blocks Jack had brought from the facility. They seemed so innocent, so childlike. But beneath their small frames lay a complexity that defied explanation. "What happens if the signal is activated?" Jack asked, his voice tinged with concern. Are we talking about an alien invasion or something worse? Dr. Huang shook her head. I don't know. But whatever it is, it's significant. They weren't just dropped here by accident. There's a purpose. As the days passed, Emily found herself growing increasingly attuned to the creatures' emotions. They didn't speak in words, but their chirps and hums conveyed a surprising depth of feeling. Luma, in particular, seemed to sense when Emily was stressed or upset, often climbing onto her lap and nuzzling against her in a soothing gesture. One evening, as Emily sat alone in the bunker while Jack and the scientists worked in the adjacent room, Luma approached her with something in its tiny hands. It was one of the colored blocks, but it had been scratched and marked with intricate patterns that looked almost like symbols. What's this? Emily asked, taking the block and examining it closely. Luma chirped, its antennae twitching. It pointed to the block, then to a blank wall in the bunker. Emily tilted her head, trying to understand. You want me to put this on the wall? Luma nodded vigorously. Curious, Emily walked to the wall and pressed the block against it. To her astonishment, the block began to glow, and the symbols etched into its surface projected onto the wall in shimmering light. The other creatures chirped excitedly, gathering around as the projection expanded, forming a complex map of stars and galaxies. Jack and the scientists rushed into the room, their eyes widening at the sight. What is that? Jack asked, staring at the glowing map. It's a star map, Dr. Green said, his voice filled with awe. But these aren't just any stars. This is a specific region of the galaxy, and it's nowhere near Earth. Emily turned to Luma, who was watching her intently. Is this where you came from? She asked softly. Luma chirped and pointed to a small, glowing point on the map. Emily's breath caught in her throat. You're trying to go home. The revelation changed everything. The creatures weren't just connected to another world. They were trying to return to it. Emily felt a mixture of relief and sadness. She had always wondered why they had come to her, but the thought of letting them go, of losing them, was almost unbearable. We have to help them, she said, her voice trembling. If they're trying to get home, we can't keep them here. Dr. Green nodded, though his expression was somber. But how? Even if we wanted to, we don't have the technology to send them across the galaxy. The signal, Dr. Huang said suddenly. If we can amplify their signal, maybe it will reach whoever or whatever they're connected to. It might trigger their return. But what if it brings something else? Jack asked, his tone cautious. Something we're not prepared for? Emily looked at him, her gaze firm. We can't let fear stop us from doing what's right. They deserve to go home, Jack. We owe them that. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Dr. Huang and Dr. Green worked tirelessly to build a device that could amplify the creature's signal. It was a makeshift contraption, cobbled together from parts scavenged from the facility and the bunker, but it had to work. As the device neared completion, the creatures grew more restless. Their chirps and hums became more frequent, their antennae glowing almost constantly. It was as if they knew something was coming. Finally, the day arrived. The device was set up in the center of the bunker, its metal frame humming softly as it powered up. Emily stood with the creatures, her hand resting gently on Luma's head. Are you ready? Dr. Huang asked. Emily nodded, though her heart ached at the thought of what might happen next. Let's do it. Dr. Green activated the device, and a low-frequency hum filled the room. The creatures responded immediately, their antennae vibrating in perfect harmony with the sound. The star map reappeared on the wall, brighter and more vivid than before. And then, without warning, the device emitted a brilliant beam of light that shot upward, passing through the bunker's ceiling and into the sky. For a moment, there was silence. Then the creatures began to chirp excitedly, their antennae glowing brighter than ever. The light from the device faded, and the star map shifted, zooming in on the glowing point Luma had identified earlier. They're answering, Dr. Huang whispered, her voice filled with wonder. But before anyone could react, the ground began to tremble. A low, resonant sound filled the air, growing louder and louder until it was almost deafening. Emily clutched Luma tightly, her heart racing as the bunker walls seemed to pulse with energy. What's happening? Jack shouted over the noise. Dr. Green stared at the star map, his eyes wide. They're coming. The words sent a chill down Emily's spine. She looked at the creatures, who were now chirping in unison, their glowing eyes fixed on the map. Whatever was about to happen, it was clear that this was only the beginning. The bunker vibrated with a force that made the walls groan under the pressure. Emily clutched Luma tighter, her heart pounding as she tried to process what Dr. Green had just said. They're coming. But who are they? Friends? Enemies? Her mind raced with possibilities. The creatures, however, didn't seem alarmed. Instead, their chirping grew melodic, harmonizing in a way that was almost hypnotic. It was as though they were welcoming whatever was approaching. Their antennae glowed brighter and pulsed rhythmically with the vibrations, filling the room with an ethereal light. Jack grabbed Emily's arm, his voice urgent. "Emily, we don't know what's about to come through that signal. What if it's something we can't control?" Emily turned to him, her expression resolute. "Jack, we owe it to them to see this through. They've trusted us. Now it's our turn to trust them." Before Jack could respond, a blinding light erupted from the star map projection on the wall. It expanded outward, filling the entire room with shimmering waves of energy. Emily shielded her eyes, but the creatures chirped louder, their voices rising in unison. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the light vanished. The room fell silent. Emily blinked, her vision adjusting to the dim light of the bunker. Dr. Huang and Dr. Green stood frozen, their eyes fixed on the center of the room, where a faint, shimmering outline had appeared. It was a figure, tall, humanoid, and radiant, as if made of pure energy. Its form shifted and pulsed, as though it were both there and not there at the same time. The creatures chirped excitedly and gathered around it, their small bodies glowing in response. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Is that who they've been calling? The figure turned its head toward her, and though it had no discernible eyes, Emily felt its gaze pierce through her. When it spoke, its voice wasn't a sound but a vibration, resonating directly in her mind. "You have cared for them well, Emily Carter." Emily staggered back, clutching Luma instinctively. "You know my name?" "We know much about you," the figure replied, its voice calm and resonant. "The ones you call your children are of our kind, yet they are also of yours. They are the bridge between worlds." Dr. Green stepped forward cautiously. "Who are you?" he asked. "And why are they here?" The figure turned its attention to him. "We are their origin, their guardians. They were sent to this world as an emissary, a test of understanding and connection. Their creation required a host of both human and celestial origin. You, Emily Carter, were chosen for your compassion and resilience." Emily's mind spun. "A test? What kind of test?" "To see if humanity could nurture and protect what is not of its own," the figure explained. "To determine if your world is ready to join a greater union of civilizations. The children were the vessel, and you have passed the test with your care and love." Emily stared at the figure, struggling to comprehend the enormity of what it was saying. Her heart swelled with pride, but also a deep ache. "So, this was all planned? You chose me to carry them, to raise them? And you have surpassed all expectations," the figure said, its form shimmering with what Emily could only describe as gratitude. "But now the children must return to their origin. Their purpose here is complete." The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. "Return? You're taking them away." The creatures chirped softly, as if sensing her distress. Luma climbed into her arms, nuzzling against her chest. Emily held it tightly, tears streaming down her face. "No," she whispered. "You can't just take them. They're my children." Jack placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice thick with emotion. "Emily, maybe this is what they were meant for." "I don't care what they were meant for," Emily snapped, her voice breaking. "They're mine. I love them." The figure remained silent for a moment, its glowing form pulsing faintly. Finally, it spoke. "Love is the foundation of all connection. And because of your love, they will always carry a part of you within them. But their journey is one that cannot end here. Their existence is tied to the balance of many worlds, not just yours." Emily shook her head, her tears falling onto Luma's small, glowing head. "I don't want to let them go," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know how. Luma chirped softly, reaching up to touch her face with its tiny hand. The warmth of its touch sent a wave of calm through her, as if it were trying to comfort her. Emily closed her eyes, holding it tightly as her heart broke. The next hour was a blur of emotions. The figure explained that the creatures would be taken to their homeworld, where they would continue to grow and fulfill their purpose. But before leaving, the figure offered something unexpected. Their connection to you will not be severed, it said. Through the bond you have forged, you will always feel their presence. And should the time come when our worlds must meet again, you will be the bridge. Emily didn't fully understand what that meant, but she nodded, her heart aching as she prepared to say goodbye. One by one, the creatures gathered around the figure, their chirps harmonizing into a song that filled the room. Luma was the last to leave. It looked up at Emily, its glowing eyes filled with something she could only describe as love. "I love you," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't forget that." Luma chirped one last time, then climbed into the figure's radiant embrace. The figure raised its arms, and a beam of light enveloped them all. Emily shielded her eyes as the light grew brighter, filling the room with a warmth that felt almost like a farewell hug. When the light faded, the creatures and the figure were gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily sank to her knees, her arms feeling unbearably empty. Jack knelt beside her, pulling her into a tight embrace. "You did the right thing," he whispered. "You gave them the chance to go home." "I know," Emily said, her voice barely audible. "But it doesn't make it any easier." Dr. Huang and Dr. Green stood nearby, their faces solemn. "What just happened here? It changes everything," Dr. Green said quietly. "Humanity isn't alone in the universe. And thanks to you, Emily, we've taken the first step towards something much bigger." In the weeks that followed, Emily tried to adjust to life without the creatures. The bunker was dismantled, and Emily and Jack returned to their home, which had been repaired in their absence. The protesters and media had largely moved on, leaving them in peace for the first time in months. But Emily's heart still ached. Every so often, she would hear a faint chirp in the back of her mind or feel a warmth in her chest, as if Luma and the others were reaching out to her from across the stars. One evening, as she stood on the porch, gazing up at the night sky, Jack joined her. "Do you think we'll ever see them again?" he asked. Emily smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with tears. "I don't know," she said, "but I feel them. I know they're out there. And I know they're okay." As she looked up at the stars, a faint, glowing point of light appeared on the horizon, blinking once before disappearing. Emily placed a hand over her heart, a sense of peace washing over her. "They'll always be with us," she said softly. "No matter how far away they are."